Well, the ascension of Jesus is what we celebrate today, if you couldn't piece that together from the readings. As we heard there, after about 40 days among his disciples, after 40 days, not about, it was 40, Jesus was taken up into the heavens and then seated at God's right hand. He now dwells there in the heavenly places. Having taken our humanity with him, he abides with God. He is seated at God's right hand, a symbol of authority and power. The angels and dominions and powers that dwell in the spiritual realm are now subject to him. They are subject to Jesus, a human being. This is all, as Paul tells us, to the glory of God. But what's the big deal, really? Why is this something that we celebrate? Because it seems like it would probably have been better if Jesus had just stayed here and ran his kingdom himself. Why is it a good thing that Jesus has been bodily ascended and is now absent from us? To answer that question, I want us to consider where it all began. No, not, at the River Jordan as Jesus was baptized, not his ministry. Not even further back with Israel's priesthood and the Mount Sinai and God coming down there, but rather at the very beginning. The creation of the world and the first human beings. God spends 6 days framing and filling the entirety of his good world. He then makes man and woman in his image and gives them the authority to rule the creation as his regents, as ministers. He makes a garden, and he puts Adam and Eve there and gives them the task of tending it and enjoying it. God himself walks about in the garden in the cool of the day. And so he, God, dwells there himself. Eden is shown to be heaven on earth, the place where heaven and earth meet. Eden was the place where God dwelt, and where Adam and Eve also dwelt. Right alongside God, ruling as his regents and ministers, Adam and Eve were fulfilling the created nature that they were given. But as we know, this heaven on earth did not last. We know it all too well. Adam and Eve are deceived, they eat of the forbidden fruit, and so they are sent out of Eden. The place of God's abiding, heaven on earth, is now guarded by angels with flaming swords, and we are kept out. Humanity, being rebellious, can no longer come to God. They can no longer be allowed to enter into the place of God's abode. They are cut off from the source of their life, of our life. And without that, we eventually die. And what is perhaps worse, the life that we lead is miserable and toilsome, sinful and crooked. But God does not leave us here in this predicament. He works through many and various people throughout history, through Noah and Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph, and through Moses. In Moses and the law, we find the means by which God again comes to dwell among us, at least amongst the people of Israel. But it's different than the garden. There's much work and sacrifice that is required. And though God dwells with Israel, it is dangerous for them to go into the house of the Lord. It is only through sacrifice, through an animal's life covering the polluting sin of Israel, that they can enter. And even then, it's only once a year, on the holiest of days, Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, that the high priest, the holiest person in all of Israel, might enter into the Holy of Holies, the holiest place, and there to be with God just briefly. All of this was predicated and required rituals that would cover and cleanse the death of sin by the lifeblood of animals. That was the only way that a human could enter into the presence of God. That was the only place where heaven and earth met, and our sinful humanity had to be cleansed of our polluting sin before we could enter. But then comes Jesus. He is the atoning sacrifice, the once for all that covers our sin, that cleanses us, and by his blood we receive new life, and the stain of our sin is taken away. His humanity is just like ours, yet without sin. And so once his work on earth is complete, his atoning death and resurrection, he is able then to enter into heaven, where God abides. He goes into the place where God lives, where he is then, it is then that his humanity is fulfilled. He is confirmed then, that the fulfillment of his humanity is confirmed then by his ascension. He is welcomed into the life and place of God's abiding. His death on the cross is the ransom payment, the cleansing sacrifice that washes away the stain and pollution of our sin. His resurrection is that surprising vindication of his death. The resurrection reshapes the suffering of the cross and proclaims that the death of death has come for those who are in Christ. And then it is the ascension that is the final fulfillment of our humanity that we share with him. By being brought into the presence of God, being seated at his right hand and given authority over all things, physical and spiritual, Jesus is shown then to be truly what humanity was made to be. From the beginning and to the last, the goal of our life is to be with God and to bear his image to the world. The ascension of Jesus affirms that he is indeed able to dwell with God, to bring humanity back to God. And so we celebrate this today. No longer do we need constant sacrifice to approach God. Jesus' one sacrifice has cleansed us once for all. If we are in Christ, if we abide in God's love, then we too will dwell and abide with God. We too will judge angels, whatever that means. The resurrected humanity of Jesus that we as his disciples share is now seated in the heavenly places. It is now with God, dwelling there without fear or shame, but instead with joy and awe. We do not yet know what it is we will be, but we know that we will be like him. And if we are like Jesus, then we too then will be welcome to dwell with God in that place where Jesus has gone to prepare for us. And so then, we rejoice. And we say, the Lord has ascended indeed. Hallelujah.